What happens when a homeless man asks Barron Trump for just $1? What began as a simple question would not only change his life but spark a ripple effect that no one saw coming. The streets of Manhattan buzzed with life, taxi horns blaring, tourists snapping photos, and business people rushing to their next meeting. But among the crowd, sitting unnoticed against the cold brick wall of a cafe, was Thomas. At 48, life had taken everything from him, his home, his job, and his family. His once proud shoulders now hunched under the weight of endless struggle. Beside him, a small cardboard sign read, "Hungry. Cold. Anything helps." Passers-by barely glanced at him, their eyes fixed on their phones or the pavement. Thomas didn't blame them. He had long since stopped hoping for kindness. But today, something felt different. Just as the shadows of evening began to stretch across the street, a pair of spotless white sneakers stopped in front of him. Thomas looked up, his weary eyes meeting those of a tall teenager. The boy was dressed in a sleek navy jacket, his hair perfectly styled, and his face was calm, almost too calm for someone his age. "Hey," Thomas croaked, his voice dry from hours of silence. "Can you spare $1?" The boy paused, tilting his head slightly as if to process the question. Then, in a voice steady and deliberate, he replied, "What do you need it for?" Thomas blinked, caught off guard. Most people either ignored him or tossed a coin without a word. This boy, this stranger, was different. "Well," Thomas stammered, "a hot cup of coffee would be nice. Maybe a sandwich if I'm lucky." The boy studied him for a moment, his gaze unwavering. Thomas shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny, unsure whether to expect kindness or rejection. But what happened next would leave him, and everyone around him completely speechless. The teenager crouched down, his pristine sneakers now just inches from Thomas's worn-out boots. His presence drew whispers from the crowd that had started to gather. Some people pulled out their phones, snapping photos and recording videos, curious about the interaction between this unlikely pair. "What's your name?" the boy asked, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "Thomas," he answered, unsure why the boy cared to ask. "And who are you?" The boy hesitated for a second, then replied, "Barron." Thomas's brow furrowed. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. Then, like a bolt of lightning, recognition dawned. Barron Trump, the youngest son of the former president. The realization made Thomas's heart race. This wasn't just any teenager, this was someone who could afford to walk away without a second thought. Yet here he was, crouched on the cold sidewalk, speaking to him as if they were equals. "Well, Barron," Thomas said cautiously, "if you're not too busy, $1 would really help me out right now." Instead of reaching into his pocket, Barron studied him, his expression serious. "How long have you been out here?" "About 6 months, Thomas admitted, his voice thick with shame. "Lost my job when the factory shut down, and things just spiraled after that." Barron nodded, his gaze unwavering. "And your family?" Thomas hesitated, his throat tightening. "Don't have one anymore. My wife left when the money dried up, and my son, well, we haven't spoken in years." For a moment, Barron said nothing. The noise of the city seemed to fade as the two locked eyes. Then, slowly, Barron reached into his jacket pocket. Thomas's heart pounded. Was he about to hand him $1? When Barron's hand emerged, he wasn't holding a single bill. Instead, he held a crisp $100 note. The sight of it made Thomas's breath catch. "This," Barron said, holding out the bill, "is for today. But I need something from you in return." Thomas blinked, stunned. What do you mean?" Barron's expression grew serious. "I need you to promise me you won't just use this to get by. Use it to start over. You're not done yet, Thomas. You've got more to give this world." The weight of those words struck Thomas harder than he expected. Tears welled in his eyes as he reached for the bill. It wasn't just money, it was hope, wrapped in a gesture he hadn't seen in years. "Do we have a deal?" Barron asked, his voice steady. Thomas nodded, his voice cracking. Yeah, we do." The crowd around them murmured louder now, their curiosity growing as Barron handed Thomas the money. But this was just the beginning. What Barron did next would leave everyone watching completely stunned. Barron didn't leave after handing over the money. Instead, he reached into his jacket again and pulled out a sleek black notebook and a pen. Scribbling something down with precision, He tore the page out and handed it to Thomas. "What's this?" Thomas asked, staring at the folded paper in his trembling hands. "It's an address," Barron explained. "It's a shelter in town. They'll give you more than a bed and a meal. They'll help you get back on your feet. Tell them I sent you, and they'll make sure you're taken care of." Thomas glanced at the paper, the simple handwritten address already sparking hope within him. Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice breaking. Barron's eyes softened. "Because I can, and because someone once taught me that small acts can create big changes. You deserve another chance." The onlookers, who had been silently observing, began murmuring among themselves. The teenager's calm yet profound response was something no one had anticipated. A woman nearby whispered, "Isn't that Barron Trump?" "He's different." Thomas looked at the $100 bill and the note in his hands, overwhelmed by emotions he hadn't felt in years: gratitude, hope, and a flicker of self-worth. I don't know how to thank you," he stammered. "Don't thank me yet," Barron said with a faint smile. "The real thanks comes when you follow through on that promise." The crowd's attention only seemed to fuel Barron's resolve. Standing up, he addressed them directly, his voice calm but firm. "We walk past people like Thomas every day, pretending not to see them. But everyone has a story, and sometimes all they need is for someone to listen, to care." The silence was deafening as his words hung in the air. Thomas felt a lump in his throat as the teenager turned back to him, crouching down once more. "I believe in you, Thomas. Don't let this be just another day. Make it the day everything changes." Thomas nodded vigorously, clutching the note as if it were a lifeline. "I will. I promise." Barron stood up, brushing off his hands. "Good. Then my job here is done." But as he started to walk away, someone in the crowd called out, "Why do you care so much about a stranger?" Barron stopped and turned, his gaze steady. "Because kindness is free, but it can be priceless for the person receiving it." The crowd erupted into applause, their earlier skepticism replaced by admiration. But Barron didn't stick around to bask in the attention. With one last nod to Thomas, he disappeared into the city, leaving behind a ripple that would grow far beyond what anyone could imagine. Thomas sat there for a moment, overwhelmed by what had just happened. The $100 in his hand was life-changing, but the words Barron had spoken meant even more. For the first time in months, he didn't feel invisible. Clutching the note tightly, Thomas whispered to himself, Maybe this is where things turn around." Unbeknownst to him, the next day would bring more than he ever expected. The shelter Barron directed him to wasn't just a place of refuge. It was the beginning of a journey that would change everything. The next morning, Thomas stood outside the address written on the note, a modest red brick building with a sign that read, Hope Haven Outreach Center. People moved in and out, some carrying food bags, others chatting with staff who greeted them warmly. Thomas hesitated. A part of him wanted to turn back to convince himself this was all too good to be true. But Barron's words echoed in his mind. Make this the day everything changes. With a deep breath, he stepped inside. The warmth of the building enveloped him immediately. A woman at the reception desk looked up, her kind eyes lighting up with recognition when she saw the note in Thomas's hand. "You must be Thomas," she said, her smile widening. "We've been expecting you." Her words caught him off guard. He hadn't expected Barron to follow through so thoroughly. "Yeah, Barron told me to come here," Thomas replied nervously, holding up the note like a ticket to a better life. She nodded. "He called ahead. Let's get you started." Within hours, Thomas found himself sitting with a caseworker who listened intently as he recounted the story of his life. The job he lost, the health issues that followed, the family he'd drifted away from, and the seemingly endless nights he'd spent on the streets. For the first time in a long while, someone wasn't just listening. They were offering solutions. By the end of the day, Thomas had been signed up for temporary housing, a counseling program, and even a workshop that would help him find work again. Sitting on the edge of his new cot that evening, Thomas held a cup of hot coffee in his hands and stared at the small but cozy room around him. It wasn't much, a bed, a table, and a closet, but to him, it felt like a palace. He thought of Barron, of the quiet confidence the teenager had shown. He had treated Thomas not like a lost cause, but like a person with untapped potential, and that more than anything was what had brought him here. Meanwhile, the story of Barron's act of kindness was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. Unbeknownst to Thomas, a video of the encounter had gone viral overnight. Filmed by a passerby, it showed Barron kneeling down to meet Thomas at eye level, handing him the $100 bill and the note, and speaking words that resonated with millions. Everyone has a story. Sometimes all they need is for someone to care. The video was shared across social media platforms, garnering millions of views and sparking a national conversation. Comments poured in. This is the kind of leadership the world needs. He didn't just throw money at the problem. He gave this man hope. A Trump showing true compassion? That's newsworthy. But it wasn't just talk. Inspired by Barron's actions, people began donating to shelters and outreach programs in their own cities. Hashtags like #KindnessChallenge and #PayItForward started trending as individuals shared their own stories of helping those in need. Back at Hope Haven, Thomas was oblivious to the wave of change his interaction with Barron had set in motion. He was too busy focusing on his next steps, attending his first counseling session, setting up a medical appointment, and filling out job applications. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was moving forward, and with each small victory, he held on to Barron's parting words. "You've got more strength in you than you realize." What Thomas didn't know was that his journey was far from over, and soon the attention surrounding his story would bring an unexpected reunion that would change his life forever. It had been a week since Thomas walked through the doors of Hope Haven. The changes in his life were already profound. He had started regaining his health, was attending daily counseling sessions, and had been enrolled in a skills program that promised job placement opportunities. For the first time in years, Thomas felt like he had control over his future. He even allowed himself to dream, a feeling he thought he'd buried long ago. But what Thomas didn't know was that his story wasn't just inspiring strangers. It had reached someone he never expected to see again. One crisp morning, as Thomas helped unload donations at the shelter, a small way to give back, he heard a voice behind him. "Thomas?" He froze, the sound of his name spoken with such familiarity sending a chill through him. Turning slowly, his eyes landed on a man standing near the entrance. He was dressed in a simple flannel shirt and jeans, his face weathered but kind. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. "David?" he whispered, his voice trembling. It was his younger brother, the one he hadn't seen or spoken to in over a decade. The years had changed them both, but there was no mistaking the bond they once shared. "I saw the video," David said, his voice thick with emotion as he stepped closer. "I didn't even know where you were. I didn't know things had gotten so bad." Thomas's eyes filled with tears as he tried to find the words. I didn't think you'd care," he admitted, his voice breaking. David shook his head, his expression a mixture of sorrow and guilt. "I didn't know how to reach you, but I never stopped caring. When I saw the video of you and Barron, I knew I had to find you." The brothers stood there, the weight of lost years pressing down on them. Then, without another word, David pulled Thomas into a tight embrace. The room seemed to fall silent around them as staff and residents paused to witness the reunion. It was a moment of healing, a reminder of the power of connection and second chances. As the two brothers sat down to talk, Thomas shared his journey, the struggles, the despair, and finally the glimmer of hope sparked by a young man's kindness. David listened intently, his guilt slowly giving way to determination. "You're not doing this alone anymore," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes, I'm here for you." Meanwhile, the video of Barron and Thomas's encounter continued to fuel a national movement. Donations to Hope Haven skyrocketed, enabling the shelter to expand its programs and help hundreds of others in need. Barron remained out of the spotlight, declining interviews and attention. For him, the act wasn't about fame, it was about impact. He quietly ensured that Hope Haven received additional support, sending a message to Thomas through the shelter staff. "Keep going, you've got this." Months later, Thomas stood on a small stage at a community event hosted by Hope Haven. He had been invited to share his story, a journey of resilience and redemption. He looked out at the crowd, his brother sitting in the front row, the shelter staff who had become like family, and strangers who had come to support the center. Taking a deep breath, he began. A few months ago, I was sitting on a street corner with nothing but a cardboard sign and a lot of regret. I thought my story was over. But one person, just one, saw me differently. He didn't see a failure. He saw potential. And that small moment changed everything. The audience listened intently as Thomas spoke about Barron Trump's unexpected kindness, the promise he had made to himself, and the journey that followed. Kindness, Thomas concluded, his voice steady, is a spark. It doesn't just help one person, it spreads, it grows, and it changes lives. I'm living proof of that. As the crowd erupted into applause, Thomas felt something he hadn't in years: pride, not just in where he was, but in who he was becoming. And though he hadn't seen Barron since that fateful day, he carried the teenager's words with him always. You've got more strength in you than you realize. It was a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness to ignite a movement and to remind someone that their story is far from over. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales that inspire and resonate. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.